Are you in a high conflict divorce? Are you having trouble communicating with your soon-to-be ex? Are you worried that this divorce is never going to end? Well, our guest today understands what you're going through. Karen McMahon is a high conflict divorce strategist, certified divorce coach, and founder of Journey Beyond Divorce. She began divorce coaching in 2010 after recognizing that the pain of her divorce led her on a transformational journey into a powerful and unexpected new life. Karen leads a national team of divorce coaches in supporting men and women around the world to become calm, clear, and confident as they navigate divorce. Could have used you about 10 years ago, Karen. Karen is also the host of the acclaimed Journey Beyond Divorce podcast and co-author of Stepping Out of Chaos, Turning Pain to Possibility. Karen, welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast.
Andrew, thanks so much for inviting me.
You know, obviously you've got your story, and I want to hear what brought you into the world of working in high conflict divorce because I give you a lot of credit to voluntarily put yourself back into that world of high conflict divorce is impressive. I work with dozens of people going through divorce every year, and I have a choice who I work with, and I'll be quite honest with you. I tend to shy away from those extremely high conflict cases. So I'd like to hear more about your story. What brought you to this world of high conflict divorce? And then maybe we'll get into some of the details.
Yeah, I went through a very high conflict divorce. The legal process took 3.5 years. My kids were 4 and 6 when I sat them down to fully own the fact that I made the decision to leave daddy. And and what ensued was a hot mess. And people say, well, what took so long? It wasn't any of the legal decisions. It wasn't any of the financial decisions. One of the things that I learned early on was your divorce will move as quickly as the slowest moving person.
Yeah.
And my ex-husband stood before the judge to say she has no grounds, tell her to go home, that she has to stay married to me. So he was in such significant resistance and denial. And so out of that came my reactivity toward him, his reactivity toward me, and, the poor kids in the middle. And I did a lot wrong, and it was a hot mess. And when I emerged, I'll just say this, I would still, 20 years later, describe my divorce as hellacious and
Mm.
also the greatest gift that was ever given to me. Because what I did and what I do with my clients is use the pain to create possibility, use the pain to heal past wounds, use the pain to refine your edges, your judgment, your insecurity, your conflict fear, your codependence, your need to control, whatever it is for you, when you use the pain of a high conflict, of any divorce, um, you will emerge a better version of yourself. And going through divorce, that means I'm a better person, I'm a better parent, and I can be a better partner. And who doesn't want that?
Yeah. Well, you learn a lot about yourself, don't you? And in the process, you learn more about yourself. And, there's the old cliche that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But I think it's a cliche because there's truth to it, no?
Yeah, 100%. And if you and your choice to each listener is you can choose to focus on what he or she is doing and what's wrong with the attorney and what's wrong with the court and what's wrong with your soon to be ex and what's wrong with everything else. And then you can emerge the exact same person on the other side that you entered, probably with just some bitterness and resentment toward everyone who was wrong. And the truth is, we're a bunch of humans. We're coming to the table with our baggage. And if this is your path, then it is for you. And finding out how it is for you requires you to look in the mirror and spend a lot less time focusing on them and a lot more time focusing on you. And that's really what we do at Journey Beyond Divorce. And people get really pissed off at us. It's like
Well,
it's okay
yeah.
because yeah,
Yeah, they do because you're holding up a mirror. You're forcing
yeah,
them to be honest with themselves.
Yeah.
And nobody, people find it very difficult to be honest with themselves and to recognize, you know, I read a great article recently about how little we really know ourselves. And I think the work that you do can be a big help. And of course, people going through the process, I think might serve as a catalyst to a willingness to be honest with themselves.
Last weekend, I was at the Big Tent Collective, it was Summit, which was in Denver. And it's the second annual gathering of men who do men's work. And these are men who crashed into whatever their wall was, went through their own hero's journey, learned from it, became more aware of themselves, and now they're out there leading other men to do the same. And they said to me, the number one thing that drives men into our groups, our retreats, our expeditions is divorce, because
Mm.
it brings us to our knees. Yeah.
So I want to backtrack a little. I'm fascinated about this topic and growth after divorce and post-traumatic growth. I love that. Maybe we can return to that, but I do want to get back to the term high conflict divorce because
Yeah.
I think most divorces, by their nature, it's a splitting, it's a negotiation. There's an element of conflict there. Now, it can be a low conflict divorce or medium or high conflict. I'm curious, in terms of high conflict divorce, let's say we have a spectrum of 1 to 10. How would you put the high conflict divorce on that spectrum? Because not every divorce is going to be a high conflict divorce.
Yeah. So if we take a step back, divorce is a rupture. It's the final rupture, right? It's like we said we tried communicating, we tried therapy, whatever we tried, and here we are. At least one party has decided, I can't do this anymore. Sometimes both parties, right? That's the more amicable. We respect each other, we love each other, but in a different way. Let's go our separate ways. So that's on the really low end. And still, there's going to be hurt feelings, there's going to be triggers. They're human beings who are trying to repair a rupture by going separate ways. There's going to be worries about money and kids. Your garden variety divorce is kind of in the middle. There's probably some boundary issues, there's probably some poor communication, but at the end of the day, there's enough respect and skill to communicate, to put the children in the center, not in the middle, make it child centric. And then you go to high conflict. And so I would say a high conflict divorce is, let's say, 7 to 12. I know we're supposed to go up to 10, but I'm saying 7 to 12. I've got one client who just emerged from 15 years. I've got another client who's in her 12th year. I have plenty of clients who didn't hit double digits, but went well beyond my 3.5 years. So high
12
conflict
years
takes
to
a long
get
time.
divorced.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
The 12-year one is not yet divorced.
Oh my
The
goodness.
15-year one is finally divorced. Now so what is high conflict? High conflict, and I'll make a statement right here, which is, and this will help your listener. If I say to you, how goes the marriage, so goes the divorce, you pin where you are on a scale of 1 to 10. So I have a lot of people who are emerging from high conflict marriages, right? So there's a lack of ownership on one side or the other. There's poor communication. There's disrespectful behavior. It might be abuse. It might be dysfunction. It might be manipulation. It might be gaslighting. There's blame and accusation. There's a black and white that goes on. It's all your fault. It's not my fault. Hey, I've got an issue. I really want to bring it on the table. You've got an issue? Well, I've got two issues. Let me talk about my issues. So you have this whole thing that the dynamic leaves almost no room for collaboration, communication, flexibility, compromise. Now, is that totally happening on one side? There is one party who is particularly locked in. The problem is the other party has been so diminished, broken, uh, lost their self-esteem, uncertain, that the way they show up is equally as triggering. It may
Yeah.
not, we're not going to get into a fault thing, but I know with my ex-husband, when he triggered me, I could sound like a raving lunatic.
Yeah.
I hated myself, but I had so little skill that when salt was poured into my trauma wound, I was like a blabbering, yelling bonehead. And the poor children in the middle are just catching emotional shrapnel as these these terrible emotional bombs are thrown across the room. And so high conflict, if you're entering divorce and you're wondering, is this going to be high conflict? A couple of questions that I would ask is, can you remember a time where you and your spouse disagreed, not on where to go to dinner, disagreed on something significant, and you were able to communicate and come to an agreement, and you didn't do all of the bending and they didn't do all of the bending. There was flexibility on both sides. Do you ever remember a time where your spouse, if they're the high conflict one, if you're the high conflict one, ever listen to anybody else's guidance, opinion, advice? So the things that present themselves crystal clear is they know everything, they're right, you're wrong, you're triggered and reactive, so you're pouring gasoline on the fire. One of the biggest things I tell my clients is learn the power of silence. You do not have to engage in every fight that you're invited to. You can just let it go by. Yeah, but then he or she will think that they're right. You're divorcing them. Who cares what they think?
Yeah.
Be quiet. Stop throwing fuel on the fire. You're creating a bonfire. You and the kids are getting burned. There's not a lot of value in it. So high conflict is that real um, friction with everything. Like, I want his sneakers back. You have to give me the extra 2 hours because, like, the most ridiculous, and everything is fought over.
This is fascinating because I'm thinking back to my own divorce. And, after hearing your story and certainly other stories of people I've worked with, I know that it didn't fall into the range of high conflict, but it certainly wasn't easy. And, it was 9 months, it was very expensive. And I often wondered, is this thing ever going to get done? And what you're saying about triggers, it takes two to tango, right? And typically there is the one person who's really hard and fast and locked in, but the way you react to that person. And I was very fortunate when I was going through my divorce. I had a very supportive girlfriend. And she said to me at one stage through this, boy, she really knows how to push your buttons, doesn't she?
Yeah,
And that's what the high
exactly.
that's what will happen, right?
Yeah, and I do want to, in defense of the person married to the really high conflict or big personality, oftentimes in my world, they are weaponizing the children. They are weaponizing the marital funds. They are putting that person in a position. I had a judge I interviewed once, and he's like, these people just need to learn how to stop fighting and communicate. And I said, how
Hmm.
long were you on the bench? Like
Really?
there's much more to the dynamic. So I think that the partner who is emerging from something that's been really dysfunctional or manipulative for them, they're trying to protect the children. They're wrong once again because their spouse is saying, well, if you were a good co-parent, you would communicate. But communicating is stepping into your manipulative web. And so I'm trying not to do that. But we're supposed to collaborate, and you suck because you're not collaborating. Well, I can't collaborate with you because, our values are so different. And so I think that there's a lot of nuance. And for people going through high conflict, when they land an attorney or a coach or a therapist who really doesn't understand, they end up being doubly victimized. And so that's one of the main reasons I pivoted to high conflict. Been doing it a long time. I lived it. I have seen so many heartbreaking and atrocious situations. But if I could just end with this, Andrew, with this little piece, to see someone go from so diminished and lost to so excited and living their best next chapter, I will do that 8 days a week. I will walk alongside people 8 days a week to see the kind of transformation that I have had the benefit of seeing hundreds of times with the human beings that we work with.
Well, let's get into that a little bit. Specifically, what can you do to help a person achieve that? You refer to it as emotional mastery. I talk about emotional regulation. We'll get into the finances in a little bit, but let's talk about moving on, whether the settlement is a good settlement or not a good settlement. How do you work with a person to help them make this transformation?
So, a couple of things. One is emotional. It has to start with emotional regulation, right? Because if, especially if you're emerging from one or two or more decades with somebody, um, you've been living with a cortisol overflow and you've been living in your amygdala, in your reptilian brain, fight, flight, freeze. And
Right.
so that's normal to you. So, one of the first things I need to do with a client is help them to notice their tells. Let's do something very simple. Where in your body do you feel when you're triggered? And it's for me, it's often my neck and my shoulders. I've had clients who said I get sweaty hands, I get a knotted stomach. Well, we've been up here trying to figure out how to navigate a complex situation. So first we have to get into our body and notice our tells. And then when I notice my tell, I need to know that I am not in my executive functioning brain. I am in fight, flight, or freeze. Anything that comes out of my mouth, he or she is going to hear wah, wah, wah. I'm going to say something stupid that I can't take back. And so the concept of a pause, the very first thing we teach people is emotional regulation and then pause.
Hmm.
Eckhart Tolle said that we have a pain body that flies up our body, that heat wave, and then it subsides in 90 seconds. So if you're in the midst of conflict, can you give yourself a 90-second pause? Can you go to the bathroom? Can you walk around the block? Can you just ask for a minute? Um, and then once it subsides, then you can get back to your executive thinking brain, your prefrontal cortex, and then you can actually engage in a conversation or decide these are really important topics. We're both rather hot and triggered right now. Let's agree to revisit them when calmer heads prevail. So you can do 100 things. So that's the first thing is we help clients see how off the rails they've gotten. It's like, I am really unhinged. How often? Every day. How often every day? Many hours every day. And then we begin to bring that down. And how do you start getting control of that? In the beginning, we just want you to get control of your head, your heart, your body, and then you're home. Like really start easy so that when you actually get into the thick of the numbers and the legalities, you've poured a solid foundation.
And it's not a switch that you can flip. This is a process. And I know going through it, the pause the pause is so important. Just take a breath. Breathing is everything. And I think whether it's um, just a simple breath, but you can build on this and build the good habits. And you mentioned walking around the block, fresh air, taking a 90-second pause. Maybe that's a 5-minute meditation. All these
I was,
practices. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. I was just listening. I don't know if you've seen Jefferson Fisher. He's a trial attorney he's does a lot of high conflict, so he's all over my social media. And just this morning, he was being interviewed on that CEO podcast, and he said, when somebody says something to you and you're triggered, even if you just don't answer right away. My clients answer like the second I'm done with my question. I'm like, you didn't even think about it.
Right.
Take a beat and then answer. So he literally says, just take a moment. Take a slow breath in. So what does that take? 3, 4, 5 seconds? You're actually getting back in your body. You're actually getting back into your thinking brain. And so even that is so, it's a baby step. And so we start where we can.
Yeah. Yeah, start where we can and just to try to build what I like to call a virtuous cycle as opposed to the vicious cycle of spiraling downward. the virtuous cycle of spiraling upwards.
Yeah.
And just the pause is a great place to start. Now, you mentioned an attorney, and this is something that I've found because I work with a lot of alternative dispute resolution processes. I'm on the leadership team of the Amicable Divorce Network. I've done a couple of cases with a new form of divorce called Soul Agree. I've been involved in mediations and collaborative. The process itself and the attorney you hire can often calm or exacerbate the situation. Don't you find? Now, you've probably heard the statement, the divorce process brings out the bad in good people, and the criminal justice system, brings out the good and bad people. Um, speak to us a little bit about the process, the attorney that you hire and the litigious process versus a more maybe mediation is not going to work with a high conflict personality, but what about choose?
Mediation is not going to work.
So
Yeah.
what about
So,
the
so
attorney then?
I think and if we even take it one step back, Andrew, what we're talking about here is get educated before you hire anybody.
Yes.
So often people come to me. I was just speaking to a new client yesterday, and she hired a collaborative attorney. Now, collaborative, so you have mediation. Um, there's two types of mediation. There's just you, your soon-to-be ex, and the mediator, or you can do what's sometimes called facilitated, where the attorneys are there too. If there's a huge power imbalance, if your soon-to-be ex is an international negotiator, this is not something you want to do, even
Right.
if it's amicable. Please don't sit down and mediate with a professional negotiator. Make sure that you have an attorney who's also a professional negotiator. It's not about winning, it's about you being able to calm your nervous system and have a healthy negotiation. So, on the most amicable side, we have mediation. In the middle, we have collaboration. And then the more high conflict is litigation. Now, I have a lot of people who are like, litigating attorneys suck, litigation is horrible, you don't want to go into the courts, it's really expensive, they're all going to just suck all the money out of you and, like, pay their kids college tuition. There are sharks out there. I have I work primarily with litigating attorneys, heart-centered, integrity-based litigating attorneys who are super good at defending people who need that extra help. I also work with collaborative attorneys who are skilled in high conflict. And so collaborative is you hire your person, I hire my person, big C collaborative. And we might have a neutral, we might have a child centered neutral, we might have a financial neutral at the table. If your spouse is not transparent, not flexible, not communicative, not willing, believes everything that they have is theirs, even collaborative may not work. I've gotten a lot of clients after collaborative didn't work. Does it mean you shouldn't try? I think that you need to have, dare I say, a come to Jesus conversation with your attorney and make sure that you share all of the reasons why you're concerned about your partner or yourself being inflexible so that they can help you make the best decision. A good collaborative attorney isn't just going to take the case to take the case. They want to work with people they can succeed with, and that's part of your job as the person doing the interviewing, is to evaluate that.
I appreciate the point that you make about not all litigating attorneys are the same, and not all of them are sharks that are just about funding the new lease on their Ferrari. That there are heart-centered, caring attorneys who are also good litigators. But you've got to find them, and you've got to speak to people like you who know these people. And this is why I'm always glad when divorcing clients come to me first, because I can recognize when a litigator is going to be needed, when it can be done through mediation or one of the other less contentious processes. But to have a coach who knows the community of attorneys, I think is very helpful.
Absolutely. And I mean, if I could, I had mentioned to you, we're launching a second business, which is the Divorce Support Network. And that's
Yes.
exactly the plan, is to have this nationwide network where we're handpicking and vetting all of the professionals, the coaches, the attorneys, the forensic accountants, the child specialists, the therapists, everybody, to make sure they're heart-centered, integrity-based, and truly aligned, so that people don't have to just open up Google and or go with
Yeah.
their girlfriend or their brother's choice, but that they have healthier, better choices. Divorce is so hard under the best circumstances.
Yeah.
It's such a multidimensional transition that anything that you can do to set yourself up for support and success is going to pay dividends long into the future.
Very well said. I agree 100%. This is the Great Divorce Podcast. And so our audience is typically people dealing with divorce later in life, over 50, and increasingly. I would say most of the cases I'm seeing these days are people in their 60s and
Yeah.
even 70s. Can you speak a little bit about what makes this stage of life uniquely destabilizing emotionally, and what you've seen in working with high conflict as it applies to, people who are, later in life?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is I've worked with people who are married 30, 40, 45 years. And so just that, it's like your spouse, for better or worse, is like a limb. You're like like that is you're so entrenched in that relationship. And honestly, some of my highest conflict, there's there's that inner critic then. Why did I stay so long? Why did I do this? Why can't I leave? What is wrong with me? And so I find that in many of the gray divorces, there's even more to unweave in those early days. It's like, how do we get you back to homeostasis? How do we get you to trusting yourself, standing in your self esteem? Like, I had lost my confidence and I was in a 10-year marriage and I had lost myself. You double, triple, quadruple that. So that's a lot. The second thing is, if there are children, they're probably grown ass adults and they have opinions.
Oh,
And
yeah.
people think that divorce is hard for the 4 and 6-year old. It's much harder for the 30 and 40-year old because they have 30 or 40 years of an intact family and they're grown-ups and they may have their own kids. And so they're mad at dad for what he did to mom, or frustrated with mom that she doesn't have her finances together, or telling them there's so many breaches of boundaries. You cannot, as a gray divorce person, call your grown ass adult and complain about your spouse. They're still the child. You don't do it. Never, ever, ever. And they don't get to tell you when you can sleep with a man or go on a date, or how you should handle your money. And so for me, two of the biggest things is that rebuilding of self, and that's setting boundaries with adult children in a really healthy way.
I'm so glad you mentioned adult children. You wouldn't be surprised to hear, I don't think, that my episode with Dr. Carol Hughes discussing the impact of on and of adult children in gray divorce was my most listened to podcast episode, because it's something that what you say is true. It does affect them so much more because they're
Right.
living their own lives. They're adulting. They've got to deal with their own issues. And what if the parents are, 60 or 70 years old and they're divorcing after a 30 or 40-year marriage? And you've got an adult child who's, say, 40, 45, and they're having their own marital issues. And they're thinking, my God, if mom and dad can't make it, how are we ever going to get through this? And they,
Carol and Bruce, I believe it's Home Will Never Be the Same Again or something like that is the name of their
yes,
book.
yes.
Phenomenal, phenomenal book. If anybody going through a great divorce has older children, don't assume they're okay. Actually, assume that they probably need to talk, and buy that book for yourself and for them. I've had a lot of clients who have actually reached out and had their kids work with Carol. Because they were so thrown on their ear. And the last point you made is such a powerful one. It's like, I thought mom and dad were solid. I'm having my own strife. Well, if they can't make it, all of a sudden there's doubt in your decision and your ability to hold it together. So it just becomes, I mean, divorce is so multidimensional, and then you add gray divorce and adult children, and it's like you're ramping up the dimensions. There's just a couple of more dimensions that you're dealing with now.
Well, everything's exacerbated because the stakes are so high financially as well. The older divorcee doesn't have the 20, 30, 40 years to recover financially. They may be approaching retirement and they need to get it right. And when one of the parties, let's just say the parties are not communicating at all, or there's a very poor level of communication. I mean, that's just going to make it all the more difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, I had a high conflict situation. Husband was he was I don't think he was a cardiologist, but he was worked in the heart area, and he had a whole practice and multiple locations, and but he, of course, business was terrible, and he was going to retire. So that's the two things. Like gray divorce, if your spouse owns a business, it's the worst year ever for the business, and they're going to retire in the next 6 months. And so you're running up against these things, and how true is it, and what's true, and how do I, especially if you've been a stay-at-home mom, for instance, which my client was, it's like I don't even know what kind of money we have, and he's saying we don't have any, so maybe we don't have any, and so then you have to bring in the experts. You have to bring in CDFAs like Andrew. You might have to bring in a forensic or a business valuator and really understand the picture, because what you're going to be told, and I'll tell you 16 years later, it is the worst year for business. It is the closest to retirement. The accounts are empty. There's nothing there. It's just the universal story, and it's usually a bunch of bunk.
And it doesn't happen that it's the worst year of business that you're trying to get a valuation done and determine the splitting of the business.
Right.
But you said something, you alluded to this earlier, that even a strong settlement alone, even if there's money there and the division is such that both parties should be able to live off a strong financial foundation going forward. That doesn't necessarily guarantee peace or freedom in one's life. And could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, what I like to say is there is no judge and there is no settlement document that is going to change the way your spouse shows up. So, in gray divorce, it's less about the kids graduating high school and more about um, new babies coming into the family and celebrations and where are the holidays going to be and things like that. And so, if you don't do the inner work, if you don't learn what your tells are, if you don't learn how to regulate your emotions, if you don't work on your mindset and decide how you're going to view things, uh, you could be under separate roofs and even with a nice amount of money in the bank and be as miserable as the day is long and not free at all. So freedom doesn't come through your attorney or the judge or the settlement. Those are necessary, and we want you to do your very best on those. Freedom is an emotional thing. Freedom comes when you can not look in the rear view mirror, but in the front windshield and be excited about it. When you can live your best life, when you can have your best relationship with the kids, not worry about the relationship they have with the other parent, when you can not look at what he or she is doing in terms of their dating or love life, but just determine what do I want and how do I create it? Because for gray divorcees, you've been for decades in a relationship, and now you didn't all want this, so I get that the statement is hard. You're independent, you're standing on your own, and the world can be your oyster, and you can do anything you want if you can keep the focus on yourself, stay off the pity pot, really stay in gratitude for everything that you do have, and let go of what you can't control. I mean, surrender, acceptance, Forgiveness, acceptance, and surrender are three practices. I call my company Journey Beyond Divorce because
Mm,
everything's a bloody journey.
yes.
None of it is a light switch.
Yeah.
There's no light switches. It's a slow, steady growing into what is for us in this experience.
I really appreciate what you're saying there, Karen. This is tremendous advice. If our listeners are interested in finding out more about what you do, how you work with people going through high conflict divorce, how can they find out more about you and get in touch with you?
So I have two things for you. One is if you're interested and you're thinking, God, I could use some extra support, we have a rapid relief call. That's not for free advice. That's for experiencing coaching and seeing if it's the right support for you. Rapidreliefcall.com. Hopefully you could put that in the show notes, Andrew. And then
I'll
the
do
other
that.
thing is my website. Well, my podcast is Journey Beyond Divorce. Tune in, but my website is JBD for Journey Beyond Divorce. JBDdivorcesupport.com. And just on the homepage, if you scroll down, we've got a section where it says, what stage are you in? Either you're on the mender end fence, you're in just preparing, you're in the negotiations, or you're heading toward post-divorce life. There are gifts for you on whichever page is, whichever stage is yours. So check out the website and you can download a curated playlist, you can download a checklist, and you can learn more about some of our free resources there.
That's terrific, Karen. I'll put the links to both those websites on the show notes for the podcast, transcendretirement.net. Just go to the podcast section and the information will be there. This is great information. I really appreciate your approach, Karen. Thank you so much.
Andrew, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Grey Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.